Thanks for having me tonight, or this afternoon. It seems like nighttime since I've been here, my jet lag. So I'm here to talk about the design of New York City, and this is my office. And for the last almost 8 years, I've had the privilege of maintaining this story of ours. And we redesign and redesign constantly because the city itself is changing all the time. This is the view out of my window, and we see the streets of New York, and it's just chaotic and messy. And I think a lot of the work that we've created has reflected that kind of energy. So the thing about New York is that its geography is kind of slow to change, and its buildings are similarly slow to develop, but the life and the culture is constantly changing. Year after year, if you come, there's different kind of inflections and different micro cultures that are brewing, and we want to capture all that. And the problem, though, is that with the city is that it's always bound by these perceptions that kind of haunts its past. So when I started, everyone was still talking about crime and law. What was it? Law and punishment or law and order. NYPD Blue, Sex in the City. Basically, the city was dangerous and dirty and congested, and on the flip side, it was full of seediness and indulgence, right? And even later on with Gossip Girl and Girls, the city is constantly run by popular culture, and we're trying to figure out a way to actually control some of this image that the city has around the world. And so some of them are more real, like the tragedy of 9/11, the financial crisis with Occupy afterwards, and then recent natural disasters. So how can we own the brand a little bit more? And that really was the charge for the mayor back in 2006. He said that could we take all the agencies that had perception changing roles, from the sports commission to the marketing office to big events, and the name of the agency that we maintained, NYC and Company, the city's tourism office, can we merge all of these things and see what happens? And so there it goes. I was hired in. I had 5 different business cards at some point, and we created this one card under NYC and Company that adopted this new logo that Wolf Olins had presented. They've been working on it for 3 years, and it was this bureaucracy that took forever to identify one mark to represent the city. And it was our task to actually sell it through to the mayor to say, it's actually not really a logo, it's more like a system. You can put different things into it, and really, no one really should have any issues with this identity because it reflected everyone and everything. And it's supposed to be a framework to really show the life in the city. And it was perfect, it was gridded, it was edgy, it was bold, it was clunky, it felt very much like New York, and at the same time, it represented kind of all of the dynamism in the city. And they're like, okay, let's do it. The really great thing, though, about it was that this was a sheet that we pulled together of all of the city agencies that had their own identities. And the mayor said, let's unify them under one brand so that not only can citizens understand the face of the city as a cohesive front, but also for the employers of the city that they all worked as one team. So there we start this program, and we launched it on city taxi cabs. And it was a crazy, crazy situation because it received critical review. And I think for a whole week, the New York Times dedicated an article about graphic design on the taxis. It was insane. Even our own Michael Beirut, who's speaking tomorrow, chimed in at some point. And really, what it taught me was that I was concerned much less about the artifacts of design, the perfection of this logo. Everything that we've been doing really was about prototyping and beta, and let's keep pushing it. And as long as it was kind of there, I wasn't perfectly concerned about perfection. And that the design process for me was really more about understanding the negotiations behind the scenes and the systems in place. And I kind of maintain that. Now, I had many do-overs, so this is the newer version of the taxi cabs are rolling on the streets right now. But really, the mark and the design symbolized change that we were going to see in the future. And I think that what we do across the city over time was to constantly mark this change with the Bloomberg administration. The services were getting better, and we were really trying to show this change in how the government really represents itself. And so all of the work that we do from the tourism side, it was to try to re-inspire people about the story of the city. How do we shift that perception? And we started with this manifesto that our friends at BBH helped us write, where it was really embracing optimism and diversity and all of the energy that in the city. And I think the last line is something like, everything, this is all at once, all at the same time, this is New York City. And this video, it shows the first time that we're trying to breathe some life into the brand by creating this narrative of a family that travels from the airports into the city, and basically the whole city animates into this kind of crazy like story. And the color yellow is the vehicle that we use throughout. I like yellow as well. And basically, the family journeys all throughout the city, and at the end of the day, I'm gonna fast forward, they're gonna end up in Times Square and arrive at this gigantic kind of parade party, and that's like the kind of the culmination that really wasn't there at the moment in time. And so my office, we design tons of things for 365 days in the year. We have about like 5 or 6 designers, a couple of writers, and we work on probably like 200 projects. So everything just goes out the door, from brochures to campaigns, more brochures, season after season. We pick a color, we pick an image. Sometimes it's chaotic and layered. Sometimes it's much more simplified. It's just kind of non-stop work. Most recently, we're trying to channel like the fragmented media streams that we see, where things are just constantly flowing. More recently, we were in London with our partners, and they gave us space, so we went for this more classic, iconic look of the city, and tried to really kind of hone in on this idea that there's this like secret narrative. We actually hired Brits to write a blog throughout the entire summer about like what their insider activities in New York City might be. So we're constantly trying to like do new things here. When we decided to actually reinvent the model of an information center in New York, what better way to do it than to kind of like do a blank slate. We tried to connect all of the technology behind what was emerging at the time. So we had Google Maps launching on mobile that we partnered with. We were redesigning our website at the time as well, and so everything that was happening in this information center was actually connected to what we were doing on the website and on your phone. You can pick itineraries, things to do throughout the city. It's stored into this little card, and then we even convinced Google at the time that they needed to add all of these 3D buildings on the map. I think they had like half of Manhattan done at the time. We're like, that's not like good enough. And so we were able to convince all of these partners to like go on this journey with us to reinvent like the touch points and the assets that the city could use to tell its own story. And so this is a website that we worked on with Huge, where the whole idea was, how do we change the editorial cycle to weekly? The stories that were coming out of New York were so fresh and new that we wanted to be able to tell a new story every week from the voice of a local, in fact. And so over the years, we've been creating more and more campaigns that are balancing this idea of the Statue of Liberty, Central Park, places that people traditionally want to go to if they're a first-time visitor. But if you come to New York many times before, you really want to see things like the gems in the boroughs outside of Manhattan. And so we're able to come up with these new campaigns that did this. Even places that were not invented yet, like a Governor's Island a couple of years ago that had formerly been off the grid for decades. We were able to work with the ownership of within the state and then the city to reimagine what kind of activities and what kind of soul it might have. Welcoming visitors was also a really important task of our job in our organization, not only to speak to the visitors who are arriving here in their own languages, but also to inform New Yorkers about the importance of tourism. And we enlisted a lot of celebrities and like local experts to tell the story. And one of them was our favorite Big Bird, who was really starting to reach out to the family audience that we were trying to go after in New York City. we were really using them as a way to showcase the neighborhoods of New York. Jimmy Fallon talking about the East Village, all of these incredible kind of like brilliant insider voices within New York, sharing their ideas. And we even created videos that ran in the back of the taxi cabs. It was an insane kind of amount of work that we were shooting all on our own, thinking, is there a different way to do the work that typically is done with like kind of stock footage? And we even worked with cultural ambassadors. We found these great champions in people like Miss Piggy, who worked with us in the fire department. The Sesame Street gang became family ambassadors for us. Basically, we tried to pair them up with different aspects of the city throughout the season. Most recently, we had Where's Waldo be our ambassadors. And some of this effort was because families didn't feel safe in New York City. And over the years, we were able to really change that perception, even building a Smurf village. I think last year we looked at the research, and over the 6 or 7 years, we were able to increase family visitation to New York by 26%. And that represented almost like $17 billion in additional income to the city. We were able to work with partners like Sony when they launched a Spider-Man movie to bring it to all of the cultural institutions across New York City. We created like spider exhibitions at the Natural History Museum, at the zoo, really figuring out how do you embed narrative across all of the attractions in the city. And we really love weeks too. We found it fascinating to be able to find specific moments in time in New York City when we needed visitors. And the city actually has high occupancy rates in their hotels. I think like 90% of the time it's like full. So we're trying to figure out during key moments in time, could we work with the various industries we were friends with to create these moments? Like off-Broadway week, we were able to sell tickets when they were not able to sell any at all. And actually, Broadway was so jealous that they wanted their own week, and we created one for them. And I think even just last year alone, we sold about 90,000 tickets on top of what they normally would have sold during that one period. Restaurant Week had been going on for a while. It's actually one of the oldest programs, and it's been replicated everywhere, but we were constantly trying to figure out ways to refresh, telling new stories, changing our characters every season slightly, but then being able to tell new stories with different partnerships that we created. And I think one of the important things to tell you too is that like as an agency, we're actually partially funded by the city, but the rest of it we have to raise funds for ourselves. And so all of these projects were designed to be somewhat self-sustainable for the city and for our organization in the future. We even partnered with like strange characters once in a while, where this one is Darcel Disappoints, where he goes on a restaurant week journey for a whole week. And I think by the end of it, he was like, my friend who was actually illustrating every single day was sick and tired of restaurant week. He was like, never again. So we try to have fun with all of our projects. We don't take ourselves too seriously. And I think in New York City, one of the dangers is trying to be too serious with what we do. At the same time, one of the things that I learned in school was that when you get an assignment, you constantly have to reframe what the assignment really is. So our task to redesign the city's tourism campaigns, we took on and said, well, how about we redesign other aspects of the city? Because I think ultimately the residents of New York are as much ambassadors to the world for New York as any of the people that we're able to get into our campaigns. So let's improve the quality of life in the city as well, which would ultimately affect tourism. So when President Obama came into office, he challenged the nation to step up and volunteer. And the mayor stepped up and said, we'll do it. We're going to create an ad campaign that supported volunteerism, and asked us to do it. And we said, why don't we actually think about the ecosystem of service and redesign the entire structure for the city? And so we started with the website. We reinvented it so that it emphasized the critical needs of the city, at the same time allowing people to punch in exactly what their talents are and matching it back up to the back end. And I think at the end of the day, we did do an ad campaign for this program, which is called NYC Needs Your Blank. And we were able to galvanize probably, I think, in the first 4 years, about 9 million people to volunteer for the city's efforts, which became really handy right after Hurricane Sandy, where there was a centralized force to come together. And I think this type of work that we were doing on the side really changed people's perspective about like what the city government was doing at the moment in time and kind of giving New Yorkers a sense of pride. We did create a commercial ultimately that also kind of utilized the same kind of like vibrancy and like use of color that we thought represented this like energy in New York. And you'll see it like right at the very end where she's talking about the mural painting as one of the projects. Now there were like I think 21 different projects that fell under NYC Service, and one of them being painting tar black roofs in New York City. I think we painted about like 6 million square feet, which ended up equating to about 400 tons of pollution that we were able to control. Some of these other projects were like Million Trees NYC that we created that really kind of found a way to solve to the mayor's goals. He wanted to increase the parkland in the city by 20%. And I think by the end of last year, we were able to get close to about 800,000 trees, which again are huge reductions in our carbon footprint. And it fell in line with the city's overall sustainability plans under Plan YC and its education program called Green YC. Now, one of the things that we learned about our city's sustainability efforts, and there's a little video, is that not everyone pays attention to the rules. So even if you fine people for breaking the law around sustainability, they'll still throw out things that should be recycled. Policy doesn't always work. And so with Green YC, we were turning to storytelling and design to figure out a more fun way to engage the public with very specific messages that we rolled out like every few months that try to test whether or not we can change behavior. And I think we were pretty successful over the last couple of years to really figure out when to dial up policy and when to dial up these kind of more like fun cultural messages. And Birdie actually is almost like a celebrity in New York nowadays. He like hangs out with all the like the tourism people as well, pushing green. But one of the things I'm most proud of actually is all of our bike initiatives that Birdie was supporting as well. The city knew that it was going to change. In Amsterdam, like biking culture is really like visible everywhere. It wasn't the case when we started in New York City. We first helped the Department of Transportation figure out a way to fund and then design all of these free helmets. We gave like tens of thousands of them away in the early years. David Byrne saw our competition to redesign bike racks around the city, and he sketched out his own. And we were able to work with his gallery and then create these brochures and convince the Public Design Trust, who manages installations in the city, that we're only going to install them for 364 days out of the year. On the last day, we're going to take them out and renovate them and then put them back in so that we avoided like public decisions on whether or not like it was like the right shape and the right designs. Really, like my favorite one, I think, is the one outside of the MoMA. Right there. But year over year, we kept designing all of these like artifacts, thinking really about the future of where this process was going to go. We supported the city's bike months, events that were really about the recreation of biking. New Yorkers at the time did not bike regularly. It was really reserved to like aggressive messengers or delivery guys. And we tried to be like fun and playful with all of the work that we created. And the next year, the Department of Transportation and Transportation Alternatives, their partner, said, let's change the color. We don't like yellow. So we took yellow and blue in the previous campaign and made green. But it really was like seeding this idea that the city was painting hundreds of miles of new bike paths along all 5 boroughs. I think by today it was like 400 of them, 400 miles of them, really changing the idea of what people thought through all the iterative designs that we made. We did photo shoots introducing the idea that you actually can bike and it's not an athletic pursuit in the city, which is really foreign to everyone. And the idea actually that it doesn't take that much time to actually go from neighborhood to neighborhood. Sometimes if you took a bus in New York City, you can walk faster than the bus. The subway on the weekends is a nightmare. So learn to explore the city on a bike. And eventually, the mayor rolled out the bike share program last year, and to this day, I think we get about 40,000 people riding bikes in New York City, and it's really transformed the city. And I think we started that movement slowly through the design work that we had created for the mayor. And so we always, again, go back to the results and the numbers, and they're pretty impressive from our standpoint. We had a goal the mayor set for us for 50 million people by 2015, right? And I think when we started, we were at 43.8. We hit 50 million people in 2011, 4 years ahead of schedule. Going back to that video that I talked to you about, this party in Times Square, we did the party in Times Square and we brought it to life. We even had this golden ticket because I really wanted a Willy Wonka moment. I thought I was gonna quit after this moment. I was like, oh, I'm done. But really, it's amazing that we were able to deliver through the design work that we created. We're at 54 million right now, 24% increase. We've increased international visitation to New York by 56%, while the US only had 25% growth in the same amount of time. These are all of our markets that we've expanded by opening offices up in all of these markets and creating work that was very local to them. And ultimately, 51% increase in our economic impact, but the more important thing is really the 90,000 jobs that we created over the last several years, rising this industry into the 5th or 6th position in New York right today. So the last thing that I'm gonna show is really the reasons why people come to New York is now that they love all of the things to do. And we showed this video recently at our annual meeting where all of these people were able to articulate things that it took our editors time to kind of write and craft and balance. We were able to capture all these sentiments, and it's a pretty great moment to kind of be able to see all walks of life in New York City being proud of our industry. So I think my time is up.
Willy, it's really awe-inspiring to...
It's a lot, right?
It's phenomenal. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the creative process at work here, because you described how there are many different institutions that have been brought together and a small creative team at the heart of it, with hundreds of projects going through it. So how does that work? And how do you avoid that being art direction?
Yeah.
Because clearly, as you've been describing it, your role's much more, and you're actually influencing strategy, you're creating whole new ways of doing things in the city.
Yeah, I think for us, the word design, like I said, is as much the things that we're creating as all of the people that we have to figure out need to be in the meetings when we discuss it, when the designers need to be in a room, and also to figure out where the negotiations need to take place. I think oftentimes we are much more focused on what might happen project after project after project to see real change versus kind of the immediate thing that's in front of us.
Yeah.
And so, working with different people, I think it's amazing to be able to kind of walk into a room and articulate the bigger vision and then allow everyone to figure out how to do things.
And so for your team, when you hold in your mind who's the client, who is the client?
So it is in this role we've learned there are so many different constituencies that you have to answer to. Ultimately, we are always thinking about the person visiting New York or the New Yorkers, and then there's that broker layer of our government officials, our businesses, and so we have to factor in this kind of maze of check-off lists of who to answer to. But ultimately, it's always the end users that we're looking towards.
And finally, I just want to ask you, I mean, you've talked a lot in terms of your impact, and I suppose, in a way, this vision that came from Mayor Bloomberg about unifying the city's identity and also actually driving more visitors to New York, which has obviously been incredibly successful.
Yeah.
But there are many different visions, aren't there, for a city?
Yeah.
And I mean, we're all going to hear this afternoon from Professor Colorati, and we're going to be hearing about the sensible city and the city that will respond to the Internet of Things and take us into new futures. Are there new visions now that you're working on for the city of New York?
We have a new mayor who stepped into the office this past January, and his focus is really different. He's really thinking about public education at the younger kind of ages. He's thinking about affordable housing, and so we're shifting kind of like the emphasis for a lot of our work and trying to kind of make the connections to a different audience that might have been left out in the previous administration that was really thinking about much more global changes. I think our previous mayor thought about everything that we did as pilots for other cities, and this one's focusing much more on New York City itself.
Willy, Wong, thank you very much.